Hey folks, Seth here. As we watch cities burn, statues being torn down, and calls to defund the police, if you haven't already, it may be time to think about personal protection. Guns Etc. has 10,200 square feet of guns, ammo, safes, and a staff that will work with you to find the best firearm for your situation. So stop by their huge store in Mesa or click on gunsetc.com and have access to over $400 million in firearms and accessories. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel.
Well, welcome back and happy July 13th. I want to tell you a story. Perhaps you know it. It's the story of a young black girl born just a little before the landmark and integrationist Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. She was born into bad poverty in rural Mississippi to a single and a teenage mom. She was so poor she wore potato sacks for her skirts and dresses. She studied hard and worked hard, received some scholarships, went to college, and perfected her career. She is now worth nearly $3 billion. To repeat, nearly $3 billion. Most normal people, or people of a generation past, and every generation before that would have said, only in America. Only in a country dedicated to the proposition that all humans are equal and have God-given rights to pursue their paths of success, enrichment, and reward, and in a country that takes those things seriously could something like that happen. Of course, as most of you know, those commitments were etched in ink and blood in 1776. That document from 1776 declared that this woman's equality as our equality, and this woman's liberty as all our liberty, was based on self-evident truths. Not caprice, not preferences, not arbitrary assignments or attributions, but self-evident truths. That woman's name is Oprah Winfrey. Today, I learned this from the USA Today. Quote, Oprah Winfrey and Lionsgate are partnering with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nikole Hannah-Jones to adapt the New York Times' recent project examining the legacy of slavery for film and television. Lionsgate said Wednesday that it will work alongside the 1619 Project architect Hannah-Jones to develop a multimedia history of slavery and its effects in America for a worldwide audience. The 1619 Project launched in August 2019 in an issue of the New York Times Magazine to mark the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans to the American continent. The wide-ranging venture examined how the impact of slavery shaped and continues to permeate all aspects of American society. It was also made into a popular podcast. The story continues. From the first moment I read the 1619 Project and immersed myself in Nikole Hannah-Jones's transformative work, I was moved, deepened, and strengthened by her empowering historical analysis, said Winfrey. The 1619 Project is also being adopted into a series of books. Now, let us note, Oprah Winfrey is associated with and has long associated herself not with self-evident truths, but something called my truth and your truth. You see, though once a truth is subject to caprice, preference, or arbitrary assignments, it's simply no longer truth. You may see a horse or a dog, and I may see a horse or a dog, the same one, and if you call it a horse or a dog, and I call it a fish or a cougar, that may be my truth. Someone may defend me, saying that's Seth's truth, but it's not the truth. In fact, it's just wrong. If I know better, it's not so much my truth as an objective lie. So, too, do we have this with what is a self-evident truth, that all men are men, not gods or beasts, and that as we are all men or human, we are all equal. Abraham Lincoln distilled it this way. He said, if A can prove, however conclusively, that he may of right enslave B, why may not B snatch the same argument and prove equally that he may enslave A? You say A is white and B is black. It is color then, the lighter having the right to enslave the darker? Take care. By this rule you are to be slave to the first man you meet with a fairer skin than your own. Well, you do not mean color exactly, so you say. You mean the whites are intellectually the superior of the blacks and therefore have the right to enslave them. Take care again. By this rule, you are to be slave to the first man you meet with an intellect superior to your own. But, say you, it is a question of interest. And if you can make it your interest, you have the right to enslave another. Very well. And if he can make it his interest, he will have the right to enslave you. That is as good a way to explain and teach the natural right of human equality as I can imagine, and everyone can apprehend it, making it all the more natural. It begins with what Harry Jaffa called the miracle of the common noun. Explained thusly, pointing to a chair, he says, when I say that this is a chair, that means two different things. First is the positive or affirmative statement that this particular object is a chair. But implicit in this is the proposition that if this was the only chair in the world, I wouldn't be able to make such a statement, for you wouldn't know what it meant. It wouldn't be self-defining. This is a particular object, though constructed in such a way so as to support the body in a semi-recumbent posture. And there are an infinite number of possible ways in which it can be done. And we call those objects, all of them, a chair. But I perceive something in common between two different chairs, don't I? Now, how is it that my mind makes the jump from the particular to the universal? It's because on the basis of a series of comparisons, I see with the eye of my mind in eidos, or species, a form which is common to all possible chairs, and in virtue of which they are all still chairs. And yet this form lacks all the characteristics in virtue of which any particular chair is not merely possible, but actual, and hence a this. For the form of the chair is at once something that is like every possible chair, and yet different from any actual chair. This experience of likeness and of difference underlies what I call the miracle of the common noun, which is truly the most miraculous of all possible human experiences. For it is this essential experience which makes language, and hence man, possible. It's not color or size that makes a chair. It's not even comfort. Similarly, only when we see that there is an infinite variety of possible human beings, each equally human, do we begin to understand the difference between the human and the non-human. And because all humans are human, regardless of color or size or anything else, they are all entitled to the same natural rights that obtain to each other. For you see, there were a people here committed in America to the idea of caprice rather than truth, for arbitrary judgments rather than self-evident truths based on nature and God. They did believe humans could be, or a class of humans could be, redefined as less than humans who were born, so to speak, with saddles on their backs and a favored few, others, born booted and spurred to ride them. There were people who thought that. If that language is familiar, it's Thomas Jefferson's writing that is definitively the opposite meaning of our founding. He called it actually, quote, a palpable truth that this was just not so, that no class of humans were born that way, in either direction, to ride or be ridden. That is, in sum, the miracle of our revolution, etched out in 1776, based on truth. Not John Calhoun's truth, or his truth, or your truth, or my truth, or even Thomas Jefferson's truth, but self-evident truth. So having grown up in the country that gave to Oprah all and more anyone could expect from a little girl born in abject poverty to a teen and unwed mom in the Jim Crow South, because we were a country dedicated to the propositions that she should be able to do anything she legally wanted and could become anything she legally could become, to the point of becoming one of the wealthiest people in the world, one of the most influential people in the world, she proved the theoretical with the actual. That this reality is and was a country where dreams could and do actually come true. That this is a country not built on racism, but built on freedom and equality, that did everything it could, including expending the lives of hundreds of thousands of white Americans, to rid itself of slavery and racism. This now much older woman, however, dispenses with self-evident truths, aligns herself with Confederate and slave-supporting ideologies that proclaim our Declaration of Independence a self-evident lie, and brings forward the notion of arbitrary truth, such that our founding was not, to her, 1776, and not steeped in those truths of freedom and equality, but rather 157 years earlier, to a time that marks this country's beginning in her truth, even though it was not a country, because she has to make the founding of the country about slavery, not freedom and equality. Roger B. Taney and Jefferson Davis and Alexander Stephens and nearly every Confederate spokesman could hardly do better. They called the Declaration of Independence a self-evident lie. If only they knew they didn't have to go that far. They could simply void the date of 1776 and ignore its language altogether to show slavery was the intent of our country's founders in an entirely different year. That all having been said, I now turn to Sean Wilentz. It's not a name I've often invoked here, but he is one of the country's most preeminent American historians, a professor at Princeton, a man who has publicly supported the Clintons and all their candidacies and opposed vociferously Republicans. I turn to a recent essay of his, joined by 4 other equally acclaimed historians, including James McPherson and Gordon Wood. They write, quote, "We are dismayed at the factual errors in the 1619 Project and the closed process behind it. These errors, which concern major events, cannot be described as interpretation or even framing. They are matters of verifiable fact, which are the foundation of both honest scholarship and honest journalism. They suggest a displacement of historical understanding by ideology, dismissal of objections on racial grounds that they are the objections of only white historians. On the American Revolution," they continue, "pivotal to any account of our history, the project asserts that the founders declared the colonies independent of Britain in order to ensure slavery would continue. This is not true. If supportable, the allegation would be astounding. Yet every statement offered by the project to validate it is false. Some of the other material in the project is also distorted, including the claim that, quote, for the most part, black Americans have fought their freedom struggles alone," close quote. They go on. The project criticizes Abraham Lincoln's views on racial equality, but ignores his conviction that the Declaration of Independence proclaimed universal equality for blacks as well as whites, a view he upheld repeatedly against powerful white supremacists who opposed him. The project also ignores Lincoln's agreement with Frederick Douglass that the Constitution was, in Douglass's words, quote, "a glorious liberty document," close quote. Instead, the project asserts that the United States was founded on racial slavery, an argument rejected by a majority of abolitionists and proclaimed by champions of slavery themselves, like John C. Calhoun, close quote. So you see some validation of my point here. The 1619 Project, like Antifa, like the BLM movement, take up and give life and credence not to the arguments of Lincoln, Douglas, and Grant, and hundreds of thousands of Americans who fought and died to oppose everything they could to oppose slavery. No, theirs is the view that comes from the Confederacy. Theirs is the view that comes from John C. Calhoun. Theirs is the view that there are no self-evident truths and that in our Declaration they were a lie. Because once you make truth arbitrary, this is what happens. Not just a major lie that travels through the world based on junk ideology, a major lie that travels through the world based on falsehood, factual falsehood. That's what happens when truth, or self-evident truth, can become his truth, her truth, my truth, or your truth. I fear for a country that goes down that road, especially because you'd have thought we learned enough from what happens when countries organize themselves by nihilism. In the words of Harry Jaffe's teacher Leo Strauss, the crucial issue of the day concerns the status of those permanent characteristics of humanity, such as the distinctions between the noble
and the base. It was the contempt for these permanencies which permitted the most radical historicists in 1933 to submit to and welcome as a dispensation of fate the verdict of the least wise and least moderate part of their nation, and at the same time to speak of wisdom and moderation. The biggest event of 1933 would rather seem to have proved, if such proof was necessary, that man cannot abandon these questions. But America, my country that went to war against such an ideology, losing another several 100,000 Americans in the cause, is today in the grip of the least wise and least moderate among us, all the while they proclaiming wisdom and moderation. This I worry about more than anything else right now. I'm Seth Leibson. The lines are open.